I gave them my life savings. They sold my house while I was still grieving. The moment I found out, it felt like the ground opened beneath me. My name is Evelyn. I'm 63. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. The people who did this are my only son Daniel and his wife Rachel. This isn't a scam by strangers. This is family. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a reckoning. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. It started with a plain white envelope delivered to the motel where I was staying. No warning, no call. Inside were sale documents and a disbursement record for the house my husband and I worked decades to pay off. I looked for my signature. It wasn't there. Rachel's name was. Daniel's approval was obvious from the way the transfer was set up. The truth hit hard, like a door slamming in my face. That house wasn't luxury, but it was steady. Every overtime shift from my years as a nurse helped pay for it. Every holiday we hosted made it feel earned. When my husband, Michael, died from a sudden stroke, I couldn't stay there alone. I asked Daniel to help me manage the paperwork for a while I stayed with them and figured out my next steps. I trusted him. He said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle it." I believed him because I wanted to. I sat on the motel bed and read each page twice. Record of sale. Disbursement of funds. The address was correct. The sale price was there. A closing date I hadn't known about. I checked the signature lines again, moving my finger slowly so I didn't miss anything. Nothing from me. I turned to the last page and saw the wire instructions. Money sent somewhere that wasn't my account. The air conditioner rattled in the corner. The room smelled faintly of bleach. I could hear a car door outside and voices passing my window. Life continued, but everything I knew about mine had just changed. I thought about the weeks before the envelope arrived. Living in Daniel and Rachel's house after the funeral. Cooking dinner to show I was trying. Buying groceries so I wasn't a burden. Rachel moving around me with short answers and long silences. Daniel keeping his eyes on his phone instead of on me. The night they said they needed space, I packed a small suitcase and told myself it would just be for a few days. I checked into the motel. I tried to breathe. I reminded myself that grief makes people say things they don't mean. Then I opened that envelope. There are moments when you expect to scream, but the sound never comes. This was one of them. My hands shook. My chest felt tight, but I stayed quiet and read. I wanted to be sure. No assumptions, no mistakes. The documents were clear. The house was gone. Daniel had texted me the week before, "Don't worry, Mom. We'll figure things out." He sent that message while the sale was already done. Rachel didn't text at all. He didn't need to. I knew how she felt about me from the way she looked past me at her own table. I put the papers on the small desk and sat down. The chair was unsteady. The lamp made a low buzzing sound. On the desk was a small notepad the motel kept by the phone. I pulled it closer and wrote the first thing that came to mind: they sold my house. I looked at those 4 words until they stopped blurring. Then I wrote another line under it: so I bought their mortgage. It wasn't true yet, but writing it made the idea real. I didn't know every step, but I knew this much. I would not be shouting, breaking things, or begging. I would move carefully. I would learn what I needed to learn. I would make calls and take notes. I would let time work for me. If they wanted to turn this into paperwork, then paperwork would speak for me. I folded the documents and slid them back into the envelope. I washed my hands, dried them with a rough towel, and sat on the edge of the bed again. I gave myself 10 minutes to feel the weight of it. 10 minutes to accept that the people I loved had made a choice that cut me out of my own life. Then I stood up and opened my small suitcase. I took out a folder where I had kept Michael's records. Old insurance information, a copy of our deed, and a list of contacts from the attorney who handled his will. I turned to the page with the lawyer's name and underlined it. I would call in the morning. I thought about the house itself. The kitchen he painted twice because I said the first color was too dark. The porch where we sat in the evenings when the Phoenix sun finally softened. The quiet bedroom where we planned to celebrate our 40th anniversary. Pieces of a life that should have been handled with care, not traded away behind my back. But turning those memories over wouldn't change the fact that a decision had been made without me. What I could change was what came next. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old messages. Daniel's words looked smaller than I remembered. Short lines. No details. Promises without dates. I opened a new message and typed, "I received documents. Call me." I watched the screen. No typing bubbles. I deleted the message and set the phone face down. I didn't need more words. I needed a plan. Outside, the light began to fade. I closed the curtains and made tea with the motel's small kettle. I sat at the desk, opened the notepad again, and wrote 3 simple tasks for the morning. 1. Call the attorney on Michael's contact list. 2. Ask about the sale documents and my options. 3. Learn how mortgage notes are sold and who buys them. I didn't know then how fast the answers would come. I didn't know that public records would show me things Daniel never intended me to see. I didn't know that within weeks I would be in a small conference room, sitting across from a bank officer, signing papers that would turn the balance of power back in my direction. What I did know was this: trust had been broken, and I wasn't going to repair it with speeches. I was going to repair my life with steps. One call, one document, one decision at a time. So that's where my story really begins, not with shouting or scenes, but with a quiet choice in a quiet room. I accepted what they had done. I faced it. And then I decided to act in a way they would never expect. They sold my house. I wasn't finished. After I found that envelope in the motel, I kept thinking back to how I ended up in that position in the first place. Betrayal doesn't usually happen in one big strike. It builds slowly through silences, excuses, and choices people think you won't notice. When Michael, my husband, was alive, we managed everything together. He worked in maintenance for the school district while I spent my days and nights in hospitals as a nurse. We weren't wealthy, but we were steady. Every paycheck went into paying off that little house on the east side of Phoenix. It took us over 20 years, but when we finally owned it free and clear, we sat at the kitchen table, held hands, and said, "This is ours." That house was where Daniel grew up. His laughter bounced down the hallway. His trophies sat proudly on the living room shelf. His drawings were taped to the fridge. I thought he carried those memories the way I did. Maybe he did once. But people change. When Michael died from a sudden stroke, the house shifted from being a comfort to being a weight. I couldn't walk past his chair without breaking. I couldn't fold laundry without noticing the empty space where his shirts should have been. Even the bed felt wrong, cold on one side, heavy on the other. I wasn't ready to let go, but I couldn't keep living inside those memories either. That's when Daniel and Rachel stepped in. They said, "Mom, come stay with us. Just for a while." Rachel had a nice house, big enough for a family. She worked in marketing, always busy, always sharp. From the start, she and I never saw eye to eye. He thought I was too traditional. I thought she was too controlling. Still, she was my son's wife, and I told myself it was my duty to make peace. I moved into their guest room after the funeral. I kept to myself. I tried not to be a burden. I cleaned, I cooked, I even slipped cash into the grocery fund, though Rachel never acknowledged it. I wanted them to see that I was still useful, still strong, even if my heart was broken. But Rachel didn't want me there. That became obvious quickly. If I turned on the television, she would walk in and change the channel without asking. If I asked Daniel a question, she would sigh loudly like I was wasting time. Once I overheard her on the phone saying, "She's always here. It feels like we're taking care of a child." Those words stayed with me. I stood in the hallway, frozen. I wanted to knock on her door and tell her she was wrong, that I had given up my whole life to raise Daniel, to give him chances she never had to earn. But I didn't. I went back to my room quietly, closed the door, and cried where no one could hear. Daniel never defended me. Whenever I hinted that Rachel didn't want me around, he would shrug and say, "She's stressed. Don't take it personally." But stress doesn't roll its eyes at you. Stress doesn't whisper insults under its breath. Stress doesn't make you feel invisible at your own son's table. So I swallowed it. I told myself to endure. Mothers endure. That's what we do. One evening I made dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. A simple meal, but one Daniel always loved. He ate quickly, barely speaking. Rachel pushed her food around the plate. Finally, she put her fork down and said, "Evelyn, this arrangement can't go on forever. We need our space." Her words cut deep. I turned to Daniel, waiting for him to speak up, to tell her I was his mother, that this was temporary, that I wasn't just some visitor overstaying her welcome. But he kept his eyes on his plate. He said nothing. That silence told me everything. I realized that night I was no longer a mother in their home. I was an inconvenience. It was like standing in a crowded room where everyone is talking and somehow no one hears you. I went back to my room, closed the door, and packed 2 suitcases. My life had been reduced to clothes, a few photos, and a box of Michael's papers. I didn't slam doors. I didn't argue. I walked out quietly because I didn't have the strength left to fight for a place I wasn't wanted. The air outside was cool. I stood at the curb with my suitcases at my feet, waiting for a cab, and realized I had nowhere to go. My own house, the one Michael and I had fought so hard to keep, was no longer mine in the way I believed. Daniel and Rachel controlled it now. I had handed it over to them, trusting they would protect it until I was ready to decide. That trust would become the knife they used. When the cab pulled up, I climbed inside and told the driver to take me to the cheapest motel nearby. As we drove, I looked out the window at the city lights. Phoenix never sleeps. Neon signs flashed, cars sped by, restaurants buzzed with life. But inside, I felt completely alone, like the city had turned its back on me too. I checked into the motel with 2 bags, a broken heart, and a sinking feeling that everything I had built was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The real betrayal hadn't even been revealed. The day that pushed everything over the edge started out like any other. I tried to stay useful around Daniel and Rachel's house. I folded laundry, wiped the counters, and stayed mostly in my room. If I came out, it was usually to cook or ask if anyone needed something from the store. I told myself small gestures would prove my value, though in truth, I felt more like a guest than a mother. That evening I made chicken pot pie. It was Daniel's favorite growing up. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a moment I felt like I belonged again. I set the table carefully, trying to create a little warmth in a house that rarely gave it back. When we sat down, Rachel scrolled on her phone between bites of salad. Daniel ate quietly, his eyes tired from a long day. The silence at that table was heavy, like everyone was waiting for someone else to speak. Then, out of nowhere, Rachel set her phone down and looked straight at Daniel. "This can't keep going," she said. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" I asked. She sighed, like she had rehearsed this already. "I mean this situation. It was supposed to be temporary. You've been here for months. You're not working. You're not contributing. We can't afford this anymore." Her words landed like blows. My heart pounded. I turned to Daniel, waiting for him to speak up, to tell her I was his mother, that this was not how family treats each other. But Daniel wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes on his plate. Finally, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, he said, "Maybe Rachel's right, Mom. Maybe it's time you found something more stable." That moment shattered me. I felt like the walls had closed in, like the home I thought I had with my son had been replaced with something cold and unrecognizable. I put my fork down carefully. "After everything, this is how you see me? As a burden?" Rachel didn't flinch. Daniel stayed silent. And I realized that begging would only make me smaller in their eyes. So I stood up, walked to my room, and began to pack. 2 suitcases. That was all I had left of a life built over decades. Clothes, some photos, Michael's papers. I didn't cry as I packed. Not then. I was too stunned to cry. When I came back to the living room with my bags, neither of them spoke. Rachel looked satisfied. Daniel looked down at his hands. I walked to the door. My voice was steady when I said, "Don't worry. You'll have your space." No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. Outside, the night air was cool, almost cold. I stood on the curb with my bags at my feet. For an hour I sat there staring at the streetlights, waiting for a cab to arrive. Daniel didn't follow me. Rachel didn't even come to the door. It was as if, in their minds, I had already been erased. That night I checked into a low-cost motel. The wallpaper was peeling. The vending machine ate my coins. The bed sagged in the middle. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could have given so much to a family that saw me as nothing more than an extra mouth to feed. The tears came then, quiet and heavy. I thought of Michael, of the life we had built, of the trust one had placed in Daniel. I thought of the house we had worked so hard to own, and the fact that I had left it in their hands, believing they would honor it. But what haunted me most was Rachel's voice at that table. "You're not working. You're not contributing. We can't afford this anymore." That was the moment I understood. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as debt. And Daniel, he chose silence. That silence told me more than words ever could. It was like watching a door you thought was always open slowly swing shut, and realizing it had been locked from the other side all along. I didn't know then how deep their betrayal would go, but I felt the first sharp cut of it that night. And once a cut is made, it only gets deeper. The first week in that motel was the hardest. I woke up before sunrise, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall until the light changed the color of the room. I tried applying for work. Front desk, cashier, caregiver, anything that would give me a reason to get up and leave that key at the front office for a few hours. Most places wanted someone younger or someone who could lift more than I reliably could. A manager at a grocery store said, "We'll call you," and never did. I checked my phone more than I want to admit. Daniel didn't write back. Rachel never would. When I wasn't looking for work, I cleaned my small room. I wiped the desk, folded the towels myself, and made the bed tight enough to smooth out thoughts I didn't want. I ate simple food from the store on the corner. Soup in a paper cup. Fruit that didn't bruise. Tea at night so my hands had something warm to hold. On the third night I pulled Michael's box onto the desk. It was the only thing that felt like mine. I had taken it from the hall closet before I left Daniel's house. Inside were folders from our life together. Tax returns, the deed to the house, insurance cards, and a small envelope with our wedding photos. I lined everything up in a neat row and worked through it like a shift chart. If I couldn't fix the past, I could at least put it in order. At the bottom of the box was a small leather pouch. I didn't remember seeing it before. Inside was a safe deposit key taped to an index card. Michael's handwriting filled the card in block letters. Desert First Bank, Box 317. For Evelyn, if anything happens to me. I sat very still. Michael was a careful man. He didn't hide things, he stored them. We had talked about wills and insurance, but not about a separate box. I checked the bank's address on my phone and wrote it down. I also found a contact sheet from the attorney who handled Michael's will, a man named Javier Alvarez. His card listed a small office near downtown. I circled his number. The next morning I called Alvarez at 9:02. He answered on the second ring. His voice was even and clear. I told him my name, told him my husband's name, and that I had documents showing my house had been sold without my consent. I didn't cry. I read the dates and the file numbers out loud. He listened without interrupting and then said, "Can you come in at 1?" His office sat above a barber shop and next to a bakery. The hallway smelled like aftershave and warm bread. Inside, the reception desk was tidy, stacked with folders and 2 pens set in a straight line. Alvarez opened the door himself. He was in his 50s, shirt sleeves rolled, glasses hanging from a cord. He shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "Let's see what we have." I spread the sale documents across his desk. He read each page slowly and made notes. "The transaction is recorded," he said finally. "We can challenge certain parts, but it will be costly and long. We would need to prove fraud or incapacity or both. Do you have reason to believe signatures were forged? I never signed anything, I said. But I left papers with my son. I trusted him to manage things while I was grieving. He nodded once. Trust is not a legal shield. I'm sorry. We can pursue this, but I want you to know what it will take. I took a breath and nodded back. What can we do today? Today, he said, we gather what is yours. Do you know about this? He held up the safe deposit key. I told him what I'd found. He checked Michael's file on his computer and pulled up a list from the probate folder. Your husband designated you as beneficiary on several items. Some were settled already. This box is still active. He called the bank and set an appointment for the afternoon. Desert First Bank was quiet. The vault door was the kind you see in old photographs, heavy and bright. A clerk led us downstairs and opened box 317. Inside were neat stacks. U.S. savings bonds, 2 certificates of deposit, a small envelope with a brokerage statement, and a typed letter from Michael to me that began, "If you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to say these things in person." I didn't read the whole letter there. I skimmed enough to understand. Michael had put away more than I knew. Not millions. Not a fortune. But enough to make decisions without begging anyone for permission. The clerk counted the bonds, took copies, and started the process for redemption. Alvarez explained each form and where my signature belonged. We transferred the CDs to my name. The brokerage account had a payable on death designation with my name already on it. We requested access and a new login. The numbers weren't small. They were steady. They looked like the kind of care a husband leaves when he knows his wife will need time. Back in the office, Alvarez pulled out a yellow pad. You asked what we can do, he said. Here are paths. He wrote as he spoke. 1. Pursue civil action regarding the house. 2. Stabilize your finances so no one can pressure you again. 3. If you want to understand how your son and his wife financed their life, we can review public filings. Public filings? He turned his monitor so I could see. Maricopa County Recorder. Notices of default, trustee sale notices, liens. When people fall behind on a mortgage, a paper trail starts. It's public. You can search by name or address. I watched as he typed. He didn't search Daniel's name without my say-so. He just showed me where to look. If their mortgage is delinquent, he said, the bank may assign or sell the note to a third party. There is a legal, regulated market for non-performing loans. It's not personal. It's business. Can someone like me buy a loan like that? I asked. With proper counsel and a clean structure, yes, he said. But only if it makes sense for you. He slid the yellow pad across the desk. On it he had written a simple list. 1. Redeem bonds/access brokerage funds. 2. Open a new bank account in your name only. 3. Create a neutral LLC for privacy and liability. 4. Learn basics of note purchases. 5. Monitor public filings for names/addresses you know. He looked at me. You don't have to do any of this today. But you do have choices. I pressed my hands flat on the desk so they wouldn't shake. I want the LLC, I said. Something quiet. No family names. He nodded. We can file this week. He suggested a simple neutral name, North Desert Capital LLC. He explained registered agents and operating agreements in words that were not meant to impress me, only to inform me. I appreciated that. He sent me home with a folder that had exactly what I needed and nothing extra. That night, back at the motel, I sat with Michael's letter. I read it slowly, one line at a time. He wrote about the day we paid off the house. He wrote about the times I stayed late at the hospital. He thanked me for the years I held our lives together with lists and calendars and reminders on sticky notes. At the bottom he wrote, "If you need help, this is my help. Use it without guilt." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I opened my new bank app and saw the first confirmed transfer from the bonds. It wasn't everything yet, but it was momentum. I made another list on the motel notepad. Call Alvarez to confirm LLC filing. Change mailing address on all accounts. Learn the basics of mortgage notes, terms, assignments, servicers, workouts. Check the county recorder site for any filings under Daniel's address. The days had been running together like pages stuck to each other after a spill. That night separated itself from the others. I wasn't whole, but I wasn't helpless. I didn't know whether Daniel and Rachel were in trouble with their own mortgage yet, and I wasn't ready to look. Not that night. I wanted to build my footing before I faced whatever I would find. I turned off the light and lay on the bed. The room was quiet except for the soft rattle of the air unit. Silence moved through the room like a draft, not cold, just honest. I had cash coming in, a lawyer who spoke clearly, a key that had unlocked more than a metal box, and a plan that didn't require anyone's permission. In the morning, I would go to the library, use their computer, and learn how notes are sold and serviced. I would read without rushing. I would take notes. I would ask Alvarez questions I wasn't embarrassed to ask. I would move one step at a time. I put the safe deposit key in my purse, closed the box, and set it at the foot of the bed. Then I slept for the first time in days. The weeks after I set up the LLC were steady but quiet. I kept to my small routine. Mornings at the library, afternoons filling out paperwork with Alvarez's help, evenings back at the motel with tea and Michael's letter. I didn't hear from Daniel. I didn't expect to. Rachel never reached out either. Silence became our language, and for the first time I started to see it not as rejection but as space I could use. At the library, I spent hours on the public computer, clicking through articles about mortgage notes. I learned words I had never said out loud before. Assignments, default, trustee sales, non-performing loans. Alvarez guided me through the basics. How banks sometimes sell troubled mortgages instead of foreclosing themselves. How investors can step in and take control of the loan. It wasn't complicated once you saw the steps laid out. It was paperwork, signatures, and money. The kind of process I understood because I had built my life on charts and checklists. One afternoon, Alvarez called. I was reviewing some public filings, he said, and I think you should see this. His office was only a short bus ride from the library. I arrived to find a folder waiting on his desk. Inside was a notice of default. My eyes scanned the page and froze at the names. Daniel Harmon and Rachel Harmon. My son and his wife. Their mortgage was 3 months behind. For a moment I didn't breathe. My first thought was disbelief. Daniel worked a stable job. Rachel earned good money. They lived in a house twice the size of mine with new furniture and a shiny car in the driveway. How could they be behind on their mortgage? Alvarez explained calmly. Sometimes people live bigger than their income. Sometimes they refinance to cover debts, then fall behind again. The why doesn't matter. What matters is the lender may sell this note. He paused. If that happens, you could buy it. The idea sat heavy in the room. I traced the edges of the filing with my finger. If I bought it, I said slowly, they would be paying me? You, or technically your LLC, Alvarez replied. It's legal. It's business. They wouldn't even know right away. Payments would be redirected, that's all. I looked at the paper again. Their address, the same one where I had carried groceries in silence, where I had cooked dinners they never appreciated, where Rachel told me I wasn't contributing. Now it was listed under default. A small part of me wanted to laugh. The house they had pushed me out of was slipping through their fingers, and they didn't even know it yet. But mostly I felt something sharper. It was the kind of clarity that only comes when life turns full circle. They had sold the roof over my head without a second thought. And now I had the chance to hold the roof over theirs. I didn't make the decision on the spot. Alvarez encouraged me to take time to think it through. But in my heart I already knew. I wanted control. Not to destroy them, not to humiliate them, but to finally sit in a position where I couldn't be erased again. Over the next week, Alvarez and I prepared. We reviewed the bank's process for selling the note. We drafted documents for North Desert Capital to bid as an investor. I transferred some of Michael's funds into the new account. I practiced signing the LLC name instead of my own. Each step was slow, steady, and careful, but I felt the ground under me firming with every page. The motel clerk noticed the change. "You've been smiling more," she said one morning when I picked up my mail. I didn't tell her why. Some things are better kept quiet until they're certain. 2 weeks later, Alvarez called again. "It's official. The lender has accepted. North Desert Capital is now the holder of record on the Harmon mortgage." I sat at the desk in my motel room, staring at the documents he had couriered over. My name wasn't on them, but my control was. The loan, the payments, the power, it all ran through me now. I whispered to myself, "So this is what it feels like." It was like holding the steering wheel after riding in the back seat for too long. That night I didn't sleep much. I pictured Daniel and Rachel at their dinner table talking about bills, never suspecting that the solution or the problem, depending on how they looked at it, was sitting right here in my hands. A week later they received their first notice. "Your mortgage has been reassigned. Effective immediately, please direct all payments to North Desert Capital LLC. For questions, contact the servicer listed below." I imagined Rachel opening the envelope, her eyes narrowing, her voice sharp as she called Daniel to the kitchen. I imagined Daniel reading it twice, maybe 3 times, before realizing there was nothing they could do but pay. Of course, they had no idea I was behind the name. That was the point. Silence is sharper than any confrontation. I folded my copy of the notice, slid it into my folder, and poured myself a cup of tea. I took one slow sip and let the warmth settle in. The people who sold my house now owed me theirs. The first month after North Desert Capital became the new lender was quiet. Payments were due on the 1st, and for a while Daniel and Rachel managed to send them in on time. I received copies of the records from the servicer. Each line on the ledger looked ordinary, but to me it was proof that the balance of power had shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one begging. By the second month, cracks began to show. The payment came 5 days late, then 7. Late fees accumulated. I didn't have to chase them. The system did it for me. Automated notices went out in neat envelopes. Each one carried the same message: payment overdue. Please remit immediately to avoid further penalties. I didn't need to imagine the look on Rachel's face when she opened them, but I did. At the motel I lived simply, but my thoughts were sharp. Every morning I boiled water for tea and spread the latest reports across the desk. I marked each payment date with a red pen. The pattern was clear. They were slipping. I remembered Rachel at her own dinner table, telling me I wasn't contributing. Now she was the one falling short. Daniel finally called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. His voice was tight, the way it gets when he's trying to sound calm but can't. "Mom, have you heard of this company, North Desert Capital?" Kept my tone even. "No, why?" "They bought our mortgage. Out of nowhere. Payments went up. These two." Rachel's furious. "We don't know who they are." I let a pause hang in the air. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. "I hope it works out." He sighed, muttered something about calling the servicer again, and hung up. He didn't ask me for help. He didn't apologize for selling my house. He just wanted sympathy, the kind I didn't have left to give. Weeks stretched on, and the stress inside their home began to spill out into the world. One of their neighbors, a woman I knew from church years ago, ran into me at the grocery store. She lowered her voice and said, "Evelyn, is Daniel all right? I've seen him outside late, arguing with Rachel. They don't look well." I only nodded. I didn't tell her that their arguments were written in the records I checked every week. By the 3rd month, the notices from the servicer grew stronger. They weren't just reminders anymore. They carried warnings. Failure to remit payment may result in further action. Rachel called me this time. Her voice was sharp, defensive. "Evelyn, do you know anything about this company? You worked in hospitals. You know people. Do you have a contact?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. No, Rachel, I said evenly. I don't. She clicked her tongue, muttered something about predatory lenders, and hung up. I sat on the motel bed afterward, tea cooling in my hands, and thought, you wanted space. Now you have it. But it wasn't joy I felt. It was steadiness. For once, I wasn't the one losing ground. Alvarez called to update me. They're close to default. If it continues, you'll have legal options: foreclosure, restructuring, or transfer. I don't want foreclosure, I told him. Not yet. Let them sit in it for a while. He nodded. Sometimes time teaches better than action. I walked back to the motel that evening under the desert sky. The air was cool and the city lights flickered like watchful eyes. I realized that I didn't need to rush. Pressure has its own clock. At their house, the tension was boiling. Another neighbor told me she heard shouting late into the night, words she couldn't repeat. Rachel stopped posting photos online of dinners and vacations. Daniel looked tired whenever I caught a glimpse of him in public. He avoided eye contact as if I might ask questions he couldn't answer. And still the payments grew later. One evening I sat at my desk reading the latest overdue notice, and a thought struck me. This was the same table where Rachel once told me I wasn't contributing. Now the records in front of me proved the opposite. They owed, and I held the ledger. It was like watching a scale tip slowly, grain by grain, until the weight shifted completely to the other side. But the truth is, I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't free. I was still in that motel, still alone, still carrying the ache of a family that had chosen distance over love. Control was not the same as comfort. The next morning the phone rang again. Daniel this time. His voice was rough, weary. Mom, things are bad. I don't know what's happening with this lender. We're drowning. He trailed off. I let the silence hang before saying, I'm sure you'll figure it out. He sighed, thanked me quietly, and hung up. I set the phone down and looked at Michael's letter on the desk. His words echoed. If you need help, this is my help. Use it without guilt. So I folded the latest notice, placed it neatly in my file, and whispered to myself, this isn't revenge. It's balance. 3 months after North Desert Capital took over Daniel and Rachel's mortgage, the servicer scheduled a tenant meeting. It was routine. Updates about new terms, property maintenance, and options for struggling borrowers. Alvarez advised me to attend. It's standard, he said. But it could also be the right moment to show your hand if you're ready. I thought about it for days. I had hidden behind paperwork and LLC filings long enough. Silence had served me well, but some truths can't be hidden forever. If Daniel and Rachel were ever going to understand what they had done, it would have to come from me directly. The meeting was set for a Wednesday evening in the community room of their subdivision. I arrived early, wearing a simple charcoal gray blazer and neat slacks. My hair was tied back, not in mourning but in control. I looked nothing like the weary woman who had once carried 2 suitcases out of their house. Residents trickled in, taking seats in folding chairs. Some chatted quietly, others looked tired and impatient. Then Daniel and Rachel walked in. Daniel's shoulders were hunched, his face pale. Rachel's eyes darted around the room, sharp and restless. They didn't notice me at first. They walked straight to the front row, whispering to each other. The property manager began with announcements. Late payments, repairs, new regulations. Then he paused, cleared his throat, and said, before we finish, I'd like to introduce the representative of North Desert Capital. The owner is here tonight to answer any questions directly. Whispers rippled through the room. Rachel sat up straighter, eyes narrowing. Daniel shifted uneasily. I stood. Every head turned as I walked slowly to the front. My shoes clicked softly against the floor. I stopped at the podium, rested my hands on the edge, and looked out at the faces in the room. Finally, my eyes settled on Daniel. His mouth fell open slightly. Rachel's face drained of color. Good evening, I said calmly. My name is Evelyn. Some of you know me. Some of you don't. But what matters is this. I represent North Desert Capital. I am the current owner of record on these mortgages, including the Harmon loan. The silence was heavy. Rachel's jaw tightened. Daniel swallowed hard. This isn't a game, I continued. This is business. Payments are due. Terms are enforced. And everyone here is treated equally. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of the truth filled the room. Rachel shot to her feet. This is insane, she snapped. You're behind this. You raised our payments, you. Daniel grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back into her chair. He looked at me, eyes wide, voice low. Mom, why? I held his gaze. Why? Because you sold the house your father and I built without asking. Because you left me with nothing. Because you let Rachel call me a burden in my own kitchen. You wanted me gone. You wanted me powerless. But I am not powerless. Daniel's face flushed red. He tried to speak, but Rachel cut in. You can't do this. This is harassment. Alvarez had prepared me for this. Kept my tone steady. Everything I've done is legal. The note was purchased. The assignment is recorded. If you're behind, that's your choice. If you're struggling, we can talk options. But no one here is above the terms they signed. The room was still. Some neighbors nodded quietly, others whispered. But all eyes were on us. Rachel's anger faltered. Her shoulders sagged. She sat back down, lips pressed tight. Daniel stared at the floor. I turned back to the group. If anyone else here has questions about payments or maintenance, I'll stay after the meeting to speak with you individually. I stepped away from the podium. The property manager picked up the agenda, but the energy in the room never recovered. People shuffled papers, avoided eye contact. The meeting ended quickly after that. As residents filed out, Daniel approached me. His voice trembled. Mom, you should have told me. I looked at him evenly. I wanted you to see it, not just hear it. Now you've seen. Rachel stayed behind him, arms crossed, eyes burning. She didn't speak. I gathered my papers, placed them neatly in my folder, and walked past them without another word. Outside, the desert air was cool, the sky streaked with fading pink. I breathed deeply for the first time in months. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't begged. I had stood in my truth, and they had finally faced it. It was like standing in the center of a storm and realizing the wind could no longer move you. That night, back at the motel, I sat with Michael's letter on the desk. I whispered aloud, "They know now." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the weight I had carried, now shifted back where it belonged. The night after the meeting, I expected silence from Daniel and Rachel. For years, silence had been their weapon. But this time it didn't last. The phone rang close to midnight. At first I ignored it, but it rang again and again until I picked up. Daniel's voice came through, low and rough. Mom, we need to talk. I didn't answer right away. I let him sit in his own words. Finally I said, "Not tonight. Tomorrow." The next morning he showed up at the motel. He didn't knock gently. His hand hit the door 3 times, sharp and urgent. I opened it and saw a son I barely recognized. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He looked older than his years, like the pressure had carved lines into him overnight. He stepped inside, sat on the edge of the chair, and leaned forward. "I didn't know it was you," he said quickly. "I swear I didn't. If I had known, I would have handled things differently. Kept my tone steady. You knew enough to sign away my house without asking me. You knew enough to let Rachel push me out." He winced but didn't argue. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Rachel said we could manage the paperwork, that it would be easier if she handled things. I trusted her. I thought it was temporary. I folded my arms. You trusted her, but not me. He looked down at his hands, twisting them together. I thought I was protecting you. The words stung. Protecting me? By erasing me? I bit back, the sharp reply rising in my throat. Instead, I said quietly, "That's not protection, Daniel. That's betrayal." The silence between us was heavy. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Rachel's falling apart, he admitted. She says you're doing this to punish us. She says you're out for revenge. I shook my head. This isn't revenge. This is balance. You took what wasn't yours to take. Now, for once, you're the ones answering to me. He leaned back, rubbed his face with both hands, and let out a long breath. She can't handle it. The late fees, the notices. She's unraveling. She blames me, then she blames you, then she just sits in silence. I don't even know who I'm married to anymore. For a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered the night he kept his eyes on his plate while Rachel told me I wasn't contributing. That memory hardened me. You chose her side, I reminded him. You let her speak for you. You let her decide who your mother was in your own home. And now you want me to save you from the consequences of those choices. He looked up, his eyes wet. I don't want saving. I want to understand. I didn't reply. Some lessons aren't taught with words. They're taught by letting people sit in the reality they built. That evening Rachel called. Her tone was nothing like Daniel's. It was sharp, brittle. So this is your grand plan? Humiliate us. Make us pay through the nose while you sit back and laugh? I answered calmly, no, Rachel. This is me enforcing the same rules you said applied to me. You told me I wasn't contributing. Now it's your turn to contribute or face the terms you signed. She scoffed. You won't break me. You're already breaking yourself, I replied. The line went silent. Then she hung up. Over the next weeks I heard from neighbors. Rachel was seen leaving the house late at night, her hair messy, her face drawn. Daniel took on extra shifts at work, coming home exhausted. The yard grew unkempt. Deliveries stopped arriving. The life they flaunted so proudly was shrinking. I drove by once, late in the evening. Lights were on in the kitchen. Through the curtains I saw Daniel pacing and Rachel sitting at the table, her head in her hands. The image stayed with me. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because it showed how thin the line was between pride and collapse. It was like watching a mirror crack slowly, one line at a time, until the whole reflection is distorted. I didn't knock. I didn't stop. I drove past, went back to the motel, and sat at my desk with Michael's letter. His words reminded me, use this help without guilt. This wasn't guilt. This was justice delivered quietly, steadily, without raising my voice. The phone stayed mostly silent after that. No more late-night calls. No more demands. Just the sound of them unraveling from a distance, while I held the records that proved how far they had fallen. For the first time I understood something clearly. I didn't need to shout or slam doors to be heard. I was being heard in every overdue notice. Every sleepless night they spent wondering who held their strings. 2 weeks passed without a word from Rachel. No sharp calls. No bitter messages. The silence was telling. When the phone finally rang, it was Daniel, not her. He didn't start with small talk. His voice was low, steady but strained. Mom, I left her. I sat very still in my motel chair, the phone pressed to my ear. I had imagined this moment but never thought it would come so soon. What do you mean? I asked. He let out a shaky breath. Rachel packed a bag 2 nights ago, stormed out, and didn't come back. Yesterday I changed the locks. I can't do it anymore. She was angry all the time, blaming you, blaming me, blaming everyone but herself. I tried to hold on, but I was drowning. I closed my eyes. For years I had prayed Daniel would open his eyes. Now hearing the words out loud, I felt both relief and sadness. Relief that he saw her for who she was. Sadness that it had taken so much pain to get here. What are you going to do now? I asked. I don't know, he admitted. I'm behind on payments, the house is falling apart, and I've lost the person I thought I could build a life with. I'm tired, Mom. I'm so tired. His voice cracked on that last word. For the first time in a long time, I didn't hear the man who sat silent at the dinner table while Rachel pushed me out. I heard the boy who used to run to me with skinned knees asking for a bandage. I can't fix everything for you, I said softly. But I can listen. And I can tell you the truth. He was quiet, waiting. You hurt me, Daniel. When you stayed silent, when you let Rachel decide who I was in your house. You broke something in me. I can't pretend that didn't happen. But I also can't ignore that you're my son. His breath caught. I know, Mom. And I hate myself for it. We sat in silence on the line for a long moment. Finally, he whispered, "Can I see you?" The next evening he came to the motel. No Rachel. Just him. He looked worn down, his shirt wrinkled, his hair unkempt, but there was something different in his eyes. A softness I hadn't seen in years. We sat across from each other at the small desk. I poured us both tea. He held the mug in his hands, staring at the steam as if it held answers. "I found her diary," he said suddenly. "Not Rachel's. Yours. You must have left it at our house by accident. I read the pages, about Dad, about what he left you. About how strong you had to be when you had nothing." I stiffened, but he continued. "I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know what you were carrying. I thought you were helpless, but you were fighting. Quietly, but fighting." I took a slow breath. That diary kept me alive when you wouldn't answer my messages. It reminded me that I mattered even when you made me feel like I didn't. His eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to be your son again." For the first time I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. It was awkward, tentative, but real. "Forgiveness isn't a gift you ask for," I told him. "It's something that grows when you start living differently. If you want to be my son again, then show me." He nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I will. I promise." We sat there in silence, but it wasn't the silence of betrayal anymore. It was the silence of two people rebuilding a bridge, one plank at a time. Later, when he left, he hugged me. Not the stiff, polite hugs of recent years, but a real one. The kind where you hold on a second longer than you plan because you don't want to let go. I watched him walk to his car under the glow of the streetlight. For the first time since Michael died, I felt the faintest flicker of peace. It was like standing at the edge of a long desert road and seeing a small light in the distance. Not close enough to touch yet, but enough to guide you forward. That night, I opened Michael's letter one more time. His words echoed, "Use this help without guilt." I realized it wasn't just money he had left me. It was strength. And maybe, just maybe, enough to carry Daniel and me into something new. The weeks that followed Daniel's visit felt different. For the first time in months, my days weren't filled only with paperwork, notices, or silence. There was something softer. Possibility. Daniel called me every few days, not to ask for money, not to complain, but to check in. Sometimes he just said, "Hi, Mom. How was your day?" It was small, but it mattered. Rachel never returned. From what I heard through neighbors, she moved in with a friend across town. The locks on the house changed, her car disappeared from the driveway, and her name slowly faded from the property records. She had chosen her path, and Daniel was finally free of her shadow. Meanwhile, North Desert Capital continued to operate. I approved repairs on other properties, signed off on routine inspections, and kept every record in order. Alvarez guided me patiently, never pushing, always reminding me, control doesn't mean revenge. Control means options. I thought about that often. The night Daniel and Rachel forced me out, I had none. Now I had more than I ever imagined. And I knew it was time to use that control to close this chapter. One morning, Alvarez slid a new set of papers across his desk. "The Harmon loan has stabilized. With Rachel gone, Daniel's making payments on time again. You have choices. Continue holding the note, transfer it, or release it." I looked down at the folder. The neat lines of text, the stamped seals, the clean signatures, all proof that I had done what they thought I couldn't. "What would you do?" I asked him. He smiled faintly. "If it were me, I'd ask myself what brings peace, not what proves a point." Peace. The word echoed in my mind. That evening I called Daniel. "I've decided to release the note," I told him. There was silence on the line. Then his voice broke. Mom, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, I replied. Just keep showing me you're different now. That's enough. The next week, Alvarez handled the transfer. The debt was no longer tied to my name, my LLC, or my hands. I had held it long enough to teach a lesson. Now it was time to let it go. With the funds I had left from Michael's accounts and the sale of a small asset, I bought a modest 2-bedroom house on the quieter side of Phoenix. Nothing extravagant. Just a home with a porch swing and a small garden in the back. A place that was mine. Not because I clung to the past, but because I had built something new. On moving day, Daniel came to help. He carried boxes inside, sweating in the Arizona sun. When we finished, we sat together on the porch swing, sipping iced tea. He looked around and said, "It feels peaceful here." I nodded. "That's the point." He hesitated, then added softly, "Thank you for everything. For not giving up on me even when I deserved it." I looked at him, really looked. The boy I raised wasn't gone. He had just been buried under years of poor choices and silence. Now he was finding his way back. "I won't say it's all forgiven," I told him. "But we're starting fresh. That's more than I thought we'd ever have." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. That night after he left, I sat on the porch swing alone, holding a cup of tea. The desert air was warm, the stars stretched wide across the sky. For the first time since Michael died, I whispered words I hadn't been able to before. "I forgive you." Not to Daniel. To myself. Because forgiveness isn't just about the people who hurt you. It's about releasing yourself from the weight they left behind. It was like setting down a heavy suitcase you didn't realize you'd been carrying and finally standing tall again. I walked back inside, picked up Michael's letter, and tucked it safely in the drawer of my bedside table. His voice had carried me through the darkest season of my life. Now I was ready to carry myself. This story began with betrayal, but it doesn't end there. It ends with strength, with balance, and with the reminder that silence is not weakness, it's preparation. So if you've ever been cast aside, if you've ever been told you don't matter, let this be your reminder. You do. And when you rise, rise steady. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.